welcome to a special episode of Dyslexia Canada's podcast, Sharing Stories. In these special episodes, guest hosts of the show will interview authors all about a book they have written. If you love books and reading, you're in the right place. Now, on with the show.
I'd like to welcome Reyna to our podcast today. I'll start with my own introduction. My name is Sarah Cronin, and I'm a volunteer for Dyslexia Canada. And I'm also an educator and a program lead for special education. So I had an opportunity to read your book, Reyna, and I sincerely enjoyed it. And it's really the first story that I've come across that explores the topic of dyslexia. And I just wanted to say thank you for bringing that awareness through books. I'll let you introduce yourself and talk a little bit about your book as well.
Okay, great. Thank you. My name is Reyna Gentin. I practiced law for many years before turning to writing about 6 years ago. And My Name is Layla is my first book for children. And as you noted, it is about a girl who has undiagnosed dyslexia. And I just tell you a little bit about the book. It's about a girl named Layla, and even that is complicated. She goes by Monk, which is her nickname, because her mother and her brother can't stand to call her Layla because it reminds them too much of the father that's abandoned the family. So she's got a lot on her plate. Her mom works full-time as a ER nurse, and she works nights. So she's not around kind of in the daytime after school hours as much as Layla may need her. And the book basically opens on the eve of 8th grade when Layla is getting ready to go to school, and she's really kind of dreading it. She's a good kid. She's well behaved. She's well liked. She has friends, but she has a really, really hard time in school, and no one has really figured out why. And no one has, perhaps they just really haven't noticed her potential. She kind of is managing to compensate somewhat for her reading difficulties, by the kind of person she is. And so that's kind of where the story opens. And we watch as she gets assigned to a new teacher, an English teacher in the school who doesn't have any preconceived notions about her, and begins to notice that she really has a lot of potential that hasn't been tapped. And this kind of really scares her on some level. So we follow her and how it works out with her class, and some choices that she makes that are in the end poor choices, but choices that eventually get her the kind of help that she needs.
Yes, thank you. I do know, reading the book, it was very familiar to me in terms of my experience in working with students who do have a diagnosis of dyslexia, in the similarities in how Layla feels about herself and how she sort of compensates and tries to hide, who she is really as a person and as a learner. So I think we have an opportunity to hear you read from your book. I believe that you have a selection already chosen. So
I do. Thank you so much. I'm just going to read a very short portion, and it happens. It's taken from the night before school starts. She's in her bedroom looking at her clothes, trying to figure out what to wear for the first day of school. And her mom comes in. And this is a scene that shows a little bit of the relationship between Layla and her mom, and also, a little bit what Layla's thinking as she starts off another school year. Earlier today was classic Mom. When she got up in the late afternoon from her night's sleep, she wandered into my room. I was combing through my t-shirts, trying to figure out what to wear tomorrow. She flopped down on my bed and watched me for a few minutes, like I was some exotic animal in the zoo that she hadn't seen before, like when they had the new pandas in Washington, D.C. "Have you picked something out, Monk?" Mom asked. I looked at the neat piles in front of me. I wanted to ask her if she remembered when she was my age how important it was to have something new to wear on the first day of school, but I didn't want to make her feel bad, so I just said no. I held up some different options, looking at myself in the mirror while Mom sat on my bed, saying nothing. After a while, I think she couldn't stand it anymore, because she sounded kind of impatient when she finally said, "Do you have to wear a shirt with some kind of slogan emblazoned across your chest? Wouldn't it be better to wear something plain and pretty and make your own statement? I looked at the shirts I'd been considering: Krispy Kreme donuts, Taylor Swift, Bart Simpson. I guess she had a point. But then I thought about the words that the teachers would see written on a blank slate. If not tomorrow, then soon enough. Lazy, underachiever, unmotivated, daydreamer. No, a ready-made saying was safer. I pulled out the Guns N' Roses t-shirt Nick brought me at the concert he went to over the summer. I don't know any of their songs, but at least it's new. This one's good, I said. Mom sighed and got up to get ready for work.
Thank you. I really like how you have given that sort of, she's trying to give herself her own identity through her t-shirts before someone else gives her a label. So when you were writing this book, what came first, the plot or the characters?
You know, I think they're so intertwined. It's one of those books where really what happens to Layla could only happen to Layla. She's a very particular personality. So in that sense, I guess maybe the character came first. But, you know, I really had a story kind of in mind about how I wanted her to progress through her story and to go from where she was there the night before school to how she ends up at the end. So I don't know, that's a very hard question to answer. And I think they're really kind of both somehow developed simultaneously.
Yes. So the book explores many topics, but what inspired you to write specifically about dyslexia?
So I was really looking for some kind of challenge that would cause a young teen to feel, in some ways, very frustrated, maybe kind of deflated, but something that was not going to be obvious necessarily to people around her. You know, there are wonderful books about kids dealing with challenges where you can see the challenge right away, right? Like I'm thinking about like the book Wonder, which is a great book, which if you've read it or your listeners have read it, is about somebody with a severe facial issue, right? A cranial facial issue. And it deals with a lot of the same kind of emotions and the same feelings of wanting people to understand that you are facing something, that they need to be kind, that we all need to be kind to one another. But in that book, it's right there. It's very obvious, right? You look at this person and you say, wow, this person is facing something very challenging. And I wonder how that makes the person feel. And I wonder if I need to help the person. But with dyslexia, it can really be kind of hidden. Layla knows that there's something not working right with the way that she's trying to process language and reading and writing. She knows that she has an issue, but she doesn't know what it is. And the people around her, you know, her mother, who's very well intentioned, and her teachers, and, you know, until they really recognize the actual issue, they don't know what's going on with her. And that I found really an interesting topic to broach. You know, what happens when you really need to dig a little deeper to see what is happening with somebody and how you can help somebody. So that's why the dyslexia kind of came into focus for me as something to write about.
I think that's a really exceptional point, because oftentimes because we can't see the dyslexia, a lot of assumptions are made about people who have it, and perhaps the behavior or the workarounds that people have developed, you know, sort of stand out more so and are really misunderstood when it comes to understanding that learner, right? And it does take someone to go a little bit deeper and dig a little bit further to really see, oh, something's amiss here, and see if we can't figure it out. Are the characters, or is the storyline inspired by events of yours or your children's lives?
No, you know, everyone asks me that when they read the book, and I'm always pleased when they ask, because to me it means that I've gotten something right about the emotions and about the fears and the feelings that somebody with dyslexia might have. I don't myself have that issue, and my children do not have that issue. But, you know, the other thing is that I think that, you know, everybody has challenges they face. And I felt like I was really able to kind of put myself in that age range, because I remember 13 and 14 years old in my own life. And, you know, I remember things that I went through, and I remember how I felt. And, you know, it might not have been specifically a reading challenge or a learning difference, but there were plenty of other things. And so although these particular events did not come from anything in my own life, I feel like I could relate to them, and I hope that other people can who don't have learning differences. I hope this book is read by people that just want to learn about other people and not necessarily, with that particular issue.
And I think what you're talking about here is empathy, really, and understanding that everyone has a story, right? And
right.
being able to understand it and take time to really feel it is important. And I liked what you said earlier about it's important to be kind, because we don't always know. It's not right there facing us. We can't always see what people are going through. You spoke to this a little bit earlier about the hopes for how the reader will feel after reading this book. But I'm wondering specifically, what are your hopes for different, versions of people? So your hope for the young person reading this book, or your hope for the parent who is reading this book, or your hope for the teacher who might be reading this book to their class or just on their own.
So first of all, I think the word hope is incredibly important, and that is really what I'm trying to get at for readers of all ages. I think that I don't want to give anything away with the story, but Layla comes close to kind of losing hope at one point. And that turns out to be, the biggest thing that could happen that would be the most disastrous for her, is for her to lose hope. And she makes some poor decisions that, she's going to spend quite a bit of time trying to come back from. And she does come back from them. And that's another really big message, I hope, in the book, is that, people are resilient and friendships are resilient. And you can do something that turns out to be damaging to a friendship. And hopefully, if you go about it, honestly and sincerely, you can repair those wounds and you can come back. And that's, those are really important messages, I think, for every age. And I do hope teachers read the book and parents read the book, because I think sometimes it's hard to get back into the mindset of your child. I mean, I know my children are 23 and 20 now, but I still am trying to sometimes get back into their mindset, and people have different frameworks at different ages of what's going on with them. And I hope that parents and teachers reading My Name is Layla will plug back into that a little bit. What was it like to be in 8th grade? What is it like to worry about the kid in the back of the class, making comments and making you feel bad? Or what is it like to, or even she's got an older brother, Layla, Nick, who's putting all his hopes on escaping his small town into his basketball. And what happens if something goes wrong with that? Where does he left? Can he come back from that? And, these are all very real life situations. I mean, I saw kids on my son's basketball team get this exact injury. And, if it happens to you when you're a senior and where the scouts are there and you're hoping to get a scholarship, this could really be devastating to a kid. And, so, and like you said before, I mean, the thing that I hope people will get out of this and remember is that, everyone is facing something, and you don't know what it is, right? I mean, I when I was her age, my father had a heart attack. Thank God he lived through it and he lived another 20 years. But, that was like the thing that was causing me pain and anguish as a 14-year-old. And you couldn't know that just by looking at me, right? You don't know when someone has a parent who's ill at home, or you don't know when someone's having a financial issue at home. Somebody's lost a job, a parent has lost a job. These are huge issues. And if we try to remember to go about our days keeping in mind that everyone is dealing with something, I think that that's really, really important.
I don't want to give anything away in the book. I think I do want to comment on this point, though, that as an educator myself, working with students who do have dyslexia, the choice that Layla makes in the book that sort of impacts her overall, it stood out so clearly to me that her, she felt she had very limited options, and that the choice she made was better than having to face the reality or being misunderstood or being embarrassed or something. So she would rather make a bigger choice with bigger impacts than have to face that. And that really hit home, like hit my heart, knowing that kids do things because they're maybe trying to avoid something else that they feel is worse, right? And as educators, it's important to remember that the behavior doesn't define the child, right? And that there's always a reason sort of behind it. And taking time to understand that we can't look at the child and say, well, this is who you are because you did this, right? Without knowing the backstory. So as an educator, that's how that part affected me. And I know that myself, like working with students, I see it manifest in a lot of different ways, but just the way it came out here, it was just so in my face. I just thought, oh, that was her choice. Like that to her was the best option she had. And I just thought, oh my goodness, like I really felt her there. So did you already have a good understanding of learning differences before writing the book, or was there a lot of research involved? And if there was some research, like how did you gather that?
So I definitely did some research. I mean, I was familiar on a very general level with what dyslexia is, but I definitely did a fair amount of reading, just, on the internet, articles. The Yale Center has a really big center on dyslexia. I did a lot of reading there. I also have friends whose children have dyslexia, and I tried to interview them a little bit to find out about, what some of the concerns would be. One thing, some people have mentioned to me is that I didn't really spend a lot of time in the book talking about how Layla's dyslexia is addressed once they do discover that she has dyslexia. And that was really very much a decision I made to try not to do something that I was going to perhaps get wrong. I mean, I'm not an expert. I don't work with children with dyslexia. I don't myself have dyslexia. So I very much didn't want to pretend that I know how these things are worked with or remedied. A number of parents told me that a big chunk of the answer is a time, like giving more time for assignments, being more careful with that. So I definitely put that in. But, I didn't want to pretend to be an expert when I'm not an expert. And I've really made that very clear. I've been going around with the book a little bit. I've been doing podcasts and, I've tried to state up front, I wanted to write something to give a voice to a dyslexic teen, and so people would understand some of the concerns and some of the ways that it might manifest, and just things that I learned along the way doing the research that, that some kids find it easier to watch a movie of a book that they are reading or to do it at the same time so that they get things clearer in their head before they're reading, things like that, which I then incorporated into the book. But I really tried to make sure that no one would mistake me for an expert that I'm not.
Yes, I think at the end of the book, you provide some hope there by not going into it. I believe that it was a discovery of Layla's that there was help. She had no idea what that secret room was all about and what happened there, which I think brings up two different points, right? Is why is that room a secret? And secondly, that it exists and that it's a resource for people. Which is, a different kind of conversation, but having to do with the stigma around it, right? So that she didn't know it was there, or that other kids might not know why it exists, and that it's actually a good thing, right? So that people can accept who they are, right? And celebrate that, as opposed to trying to hide it.
For sure.
So
and I
thought
tried to show that a little bit with Sammy, her friend, because he goes there and he's got this executive functioning deficit, and he's totally comfortable in his own skin. Like nobody is cheerier than Sammy, and like he's great. And like, what? It's fine that he's disorganized, and it's fine that he needs help, and he loves the woman who works in the resource room, and that's all good. And I think he kind of tries to show Layla, like, what? It's fine. Like it's all good. Like we're all getting our help, and that's you need help with this one day and somebody else will need help with something else another day, and it's all fine.
Yeah, that was such a nice foundation for peers helping peers and bringing more acceptance to the stigma of it. Has anyone you know with dyslexia read this book? And if so, what was their reaction?
A bunch of people have. Definitely, I have been doing some podcasts around dyslexia. And so a number of people that have dyslexia have read the book. I've gotten two reactions, I would say. One is people are, and it's going to sound silly, but people are happy that it's a shorter book, that it's not a book that's going to be so challenging to actually get through that they're not going to enjoy it. So that wasn't really so much by design as that just kind of where the story took me. And I didn't want to write a 300-page book, so that's been good. And I think the other thing is that people have said that, that I got a lot of the emotions kind of head on, like, even just like at some point, she gets a little stomach ache thinking about what's happening. And, just things like that they're anxiety symptoms, and they're not any different from anybody who's anxious about something else, I don't think. But just to remember that, this is something that can cause real anxiety and can cause kids to, and as you said, like, can cause kids to act and behave in ways that, maybe is not their first choice on how to act or behave. And I think, one thing I also discovered in the research a little bit is that, oftentimes boys get identified more readily than girls. And I am assuming, and this may be wrong, but I think sometimes boys tend to show it in their behavior a little more, and maybe girls are holding it together a little better. And that was another reason I kind of picked a girl to have it be the protagonist, because I wanted to show, like, look, she can also get super frustrated and do something really not good. And, and that's okay. Like, that's not really a gender specific thing. That's really just kind of a level of frustration kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And, and I think, there are a lot of aspects of the book that I found interesting to write. I mean, I think her relationship with her dad, he's not really part of the book so much, but then, we learn later on that he's also got issues with reading, and, and that would have been something so important to know, right, for her, because, dyslexia does have this genetic component. And, wow, what would that have looked like if somebody had said early on in her schooling, oh, your dad is dyslexic, perhaps we need to look into this. And, that could have made all the difference in the world for her. But because her dad, wasn't really so involved with the family, we don't have that critical piece of information until much later on. So, I learned a tremendous amount about dyslexia and about how people cope. And, I hope I managed to get some of it across.
I really appreciated the emotion behind the book. As an educator, I do read a lot about various exceptionalities, and dyslexia being one of them. And most of the reading material is very, scientific and research based. And they do try to convey some of the emotion, but it's certainly not the focus, right? And so it was refreshing to me to read a novel, a story that brought to life and brought feelings with it. So that was a good part for me as well. You kind of touched on this a little bit, but is there any one thing that you learned during your research that kind of stood out and surprised you?
I mean, I guess the biggest thing was just how incredibly prevalent dyslexia is. I didn't really know that it affected, I think I've read, figures such as up to 20% of the population, which is obviously huge. And, I just really wasn't aware of it. I had sort of anecdotal evidence, this friend's child or this cousin of mine or whatever, but I had no idea really the extent to which it affects people. And, and it's hard, as somebody that doesn't have that challenge, it's hard to imagine what that would be like. It seems so overwhelming to me. And, I think coming to some, to have a little more compassion about that is really critical for me. And I think it would be really important for kids, in general, because these are kids that are in your midst. These are generally not kids that are being, necessary. There are schools that deal primarily with language-based learning differences, but there are also dyslexic kids all over, and, in all your classes. And, that just seems really important to be aware of.
I'm wondering as well, if you have a message for the young people who do have dyslexia that are listening to this podcast.
So I guess I would say right off the bat, you're one step ahead of Layla, because you've been identified as somebody that needs certain help, and I'm going to assume you're getting that help. And that's really incredibly important. And, I think just to persevere and to understand that, being in the game and being resilient is, 95% of what's going on. I think you get pegged as not pushing yourself and not trying hard. And I think that has got to be so wrong. Like, to me, I've seen my own kids struggle with other things, not this, but other things. And no one tries harder than a kid who wants to succeed, right? Who wants to just have things be great. And I would just say, like, you're capable of it. And, you may need help. You may need extra time. You may need whatever accommodation it is that you need, but you can do it. And, you should never lose faith in yourself.
One of the things that I really work hard with my students is sharing that very similar message. So helping them really understand where their challenges and where their roadblocks are, and then understanding how to articulate that so that they can ask for what they need. And I always tell them, this is something that is it's a blessing, because you know yourself so well as a learner, because you have to dissect it, because you need to understand where you're tripping up and then find a workaround to make it more functional for you. And I always think that my students that I work with know themselves so well that way, and it gives them an advantage over other learners where things come naturally. Like reading, for example, if you don't have issues like dyslexia for reading, you have no idea how involved reading actually is. It's a multi-step process that we don't really pay attention to. So someone who has dyslexia certainly begins to understand like all of the pieces that go along with it, and they really begin to understand who they are as learners, and they benefit from that knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. So how can listeners get a hold of your book? And are there plans for an audiobook?
So a lot of people have asked me about an audiobook, and obviously that would make so much sense for this community. And I do hope that they will make an audiobook at some point, but it's not really up to me. It's up to the publisher. So I've put in a vote for that numerous times. So we'll see how that goes. And you can get the book, you can order it on Amazon Canada. And I believe you can probably ask for it in bookstores. They would have to order it for you. It's not going to be on the shelf necessarily, because I'm not in Canada. And to be honest, even here in the US, it's something that gets ordered. But definitely on Amazon or Barnes & Nobles, you could get it.
Excellent. Thank you. I really encourage our listeners to contact us when you've had a chance to read this book and share your version and your experience of reading the book with us on Dyslexia Canada. Thank you so much, Reyna, for joining us today. It's been a real pleasure talking with you and diving into your understanding of the importance of bringing awareness and bringing voice to people who do have dyslexia.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for tuning into this episode. If you want to find the books mentioned on this show, head over to our website at dyslexiacanada.org/sharing-stories-podcast. Please support this podcast by subscribing and leaving a review. We wouldn't be here without you.